Welcome to the Legal Leaders Podcast, brought to you by MView, LawView's community for in-house legal professionals, where we dive into the heart of the legal profession to bring you unfiltered discussions with industry titans on a broad spectrum of topics.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Legal Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, David Lancelot, the CLO and EVP of Advocacy at LawView. I have a special edition today I'm really excited about. We're going to be talking about building the scalable engine room for the legal function, what I think of as the commercial contract engine room that drives much of the work in many legal functions. And I have friends and ex-colleagues of mine, Cory Sumsion and Greg Lorenzon. Guys, you want to introduce yourself? Cory?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, David. Thanks for having us. Really excited to have this opportunity. My name is Cory Sumsion. I'm currently the head of commercial legal at Signifyd, leading our commercial and sales function. And prior to this role, started out at a regional bank, Zions Bank Corporation. Had the opportunity to grow and advance there, and eventually leading a commercial team. And had the opportunity as well along that way through a lot of leadership there to be able to build a homegrown, somewhat rudimentary, but actually very useful intake process for a lot of our contracts that were coming from various banks that, across the states, and didn't have a lot of understanding as far as the importance of it. But as that continued to grow, saw a lot of value in being able to grab data and things that came from the different contracts that we were working on. From there, able to go to eBay, where the three of us met, and had the opportunity as well through great leadership that had a good vision and had opportunities to help grow in my position and to eventually lead a commercial legal function as well as a legal operations function, and focusing a lot on ways to improve and scale and streamline that contracting process, which in a lot of ways was even more critical as we were a global organization and needed to have some sort of streamlined approach or consistent approach in how we submitted and reviewed contracting. So again, thanks for having me.
And now you're at Signifyd. How long have you been at Signifyd now?
I've been at Signifyd now for maybe going on a year and a half. I'm happy to discuss throughout this call some of the things that we've been able to do in a short period of time, and some of the key ways to go about it that try to remove or they help remove roadblocks and some of the things that may come as a legal function, and particularly as a cost center, trying to show and add the value, aside from just the heads down, I'm going to review every contract that comes my way.
Thank you, Cory. Greg?
Yeah. Hey, thanks as well for having me on this podcast. It's super fun. Anytime I can spend a few minutes with Cory and David, I consider it a good day. Wish it was in person, but I'll take it. So a little bit about myself. I'm currently Associate General Counsel at Clearlink. I've been there for a couple of years. Just maybe give you some background on my prior experience. I started out a small law firm doing all sorts of litigation and business legal matters. Then moved on to Zions Bank Corp, where actually I first met Cory and had some similar experiences as he described there. From Zions, I went over to Phillips Edison. They are one of the largest private owners of shopping centers in the country, or at the time they were the largest. So kind of switched gears a little bit into more from the fintech or financial side to commercial real estate. So was able to get kind of a really broad sort of experience from both of those organizations, and interestingly kind of seeing how, their tools and, processes sort of were really formulated a lot of the things that kind of came out later in my career, and how we structured things. So from Phillips Edison, went on to eBay Classifieds Group, and really was able to see firsthand and be a part of the building and scaling of what we're going to be talking about today, which was super exciting and something I really get jazzed about every time I talk about talk about it. So I was able to work with eBay Classifieds Group and Adavinta once we merged several years ago, and then ultimately ended up at Clearlink. And that's a quick synopsis of my background. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Greg. And I think it's probably worth saying that both of you guys are in Silicon Slopes, which I guess is the cool name for the Salt Lake City area. And it is, if anybody hasn't been there, I mean, I know obviously a lot of people won't have been to some places like Salt Lake City. I love Salt Lake, and it is always really impressive to me to see how many tech businesses have campuses there. We had at eBay, I forget how many thousands of people on a campus there, right? But of course, next door was, I think it was Thumbtack. Adobe's got a big campus there. So it's a really significant place for technology businesses to base in the United States. And I had the very good fortune to work with these guys, and didn't really realize how great a place it was. And now I was recently there, rock climbing, mountain biking, love going skiing there. So it's just a fantastic location if you get to have a business opportunity to go there regularly. I really lucked out. So let's kick off the discussion about building this, as I said, what I think of as the scalable engine room. And I think I'd like to start with, before we get to the how, right? And I know you guys are very deep in the how. I'd like to start with the why. What do you guys think is the reason to build this thing, right? Like you could have I think a more traditional approach to building an in-house legal function, which is basically lots of lawyers, right? As many lawyers as you can afford. Substantive expertise is the key in that situation. Pretty reactive, and just, I call it throwing lawyers at the problem. Why would you do it differently? Why would you build an engine room? You want to start, Greg?
Yeah, thanks. Honestly, in a short answer, to do things smarter and more efficiently. There's just so many antiquated ways that I think I still see a lot of in-house commercial functions operating. And there's just this ability to really build technology or tools and implement technology and structure things in a way within the department that can really drive efficiencies, can really make difference in terms of how quickly the business needs can be met and how quickly the team, meaning the legal team, can get through the volume of contracts and other matters, so that the attorneys can really focus on the more strategic and important things that the business needs more attention on.
Absolutely. Cory, thoughts?
Yeah. And I guess I just kind of piggyback on top of that too, because a lot of that is really, I think, the key issue. As an in-house team, you have a lot of different opportunities or a lot of different projects and things that are thrown your way, but not everything really needs full legal review. And so I think the why is you are there to really help grow the business. You're there to actually be a function to help the company itself and not just within your role. But I think the why a lot of times is, how can you quickly get through those things that have to get done, but don't necessarily need a full legal review, so that, as Greg mentioned, you can then focus your time on those things that are more strategic, those things that really add more value to the actual growth of the company, or even just in a smaller ways. How can you then focus your time on those particular teams that you support, that they, through your help, actually adds value to the company? If you're always bogged down on the menial administrative, just the day-to-day type work, you'll never be able to have your head up high enough in order to see where actually can you assist the company as more of a partner with them in order to help drive the business. I think that's what is critical. And I think that's what has been a shift lately for legal teams is, okay, we know we have to get these amendments done. We have to get these SOWs, these NDA done. how much time do we really need to put into those versus these larger strategic deals? These things are going to really like shape the company. And once you can step back and then try to talk about those things, bring it up to leadership, get alignment on it, and then put a process to it, or put some type of a review process against it. That's where you then free up your time, I think, to add value. And again, your cost center becomes more of a value add, and not just this black hole, this team that just does things behind the curtain.
Yes.
Yeah. And Cory, if I can jump in and elaborate a little bit on a thought I had while you were speaking, it's interesting because I think some companies don't fully appreciate or really even understand that whole concept, right? And so you sort of have to introduce it in a way that, that maybe, it gives them some clarity and understanding where they otherwise wouldn't have it, because some people just don't really see it that way yet.
Right.
And they don't really see how much value could be provided that way.
And I think,
Right. You see it as kind of like the next step. It's like, okay, we did our piece. Now it's time for legal to do their stuff. And it's like, step one is done. Now step two, rather than it being just both of you working together. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, totally. So I think we're, and I know you guys, and we've talked about this many times, but I think our profession and how we run the function, including as part of the business, is going through a pretty significant transformation. And of course, part of this transformation is the idea that the legal function can be a competitive advantage to the business, right? Not just a sort of in-house law firm, which still exists in many places and does a great job of doing the legal work, but is just completely overwhelmed in most cases. And you get terrible results for people when they're massively overwhelmed with work. I think one of those being the risk tolerance of the business through the legal function goes way down, because the lawyers just don't have the bandwidth to think about whatever's brought to them, right? Whether it's a project or a product or a commercial agreement, negotiation, whatever. Lawyers can use, not nefariously, but they can use risk tolerance as a way to manage workload. And hence, a business becomes less able to compete, because its lawyers don't have the time to say, that's a really cool idea. Let's talk about it, right? I'm in the room where it happens, and let's talk about that interesting project that you've got. Not, sorry, I can't come to that meeting. I never get invited to anything because all I do all day is drown in emails, basically, right?
Yeah.
So I think for me, that's the purpose. The purpose is to get to a place where we are a value driver and not a cost center. I really don't like the cost center narrative. I think it's been driven by an approach to running legal that is very focused on external counsel fees,
right?
And metrics against those. And I absolutely raise my hand and say I did plenty of that. Right? I did plenty of total legal spend versus revenue over time equals versus benchmarks, and that resulted in a strong cost center narrative. And when we worked hard to pivot to a value driving one, and you guys were both part of that. So it's really great to have you here to talk about it. So operational mindset. I think I talk a lot about this when I'm doing whatever I'm doing. This idea that lawyers are trained, all legal professionals are trained generally, law school, if you went to law school, law firm, if you worked in a law firm, to be very focused on the substantive legal issues, getting down to the details, etc. I've even done sort of, I guess you call them interview processes to do stuff with law firms, where they would say to me, here, prove you're a lawyer, review this contract. Yeah. And of course, my response to them was, that's silly. Nobody does software development agreements anymore, whatever. And why aren't we talking about how to do this more efficiently? They just don't get it, right? Like, law firms don't get it. Law schools don't get it. How do you instill this idea of, if what I think of as operational mindset. How do you instill that in teams, in leadership? Like if we've done this thing 3 times, we shouldn't do it again, kind of idea. How do you start that journey of bringing operational mindset to the fore?
So I can start on that one. I think there's a few different things. I think one is your own leadership is where you need to start. So you need to start within your team in order to show that, because once you can get that buy-in from your own leadership, and a lot of times that also makes it easier for them than to socialize it to their peers. Now, it depends on where you sit within your legal function. If you're already at the top, then it makes it easier in some regards, because you can then show what it is that the team is focused on. I think we'll talk a little bit, but there's a really powerful part of what we're doing within a legal field, and being able to get different metrics and reporting where you can actually show the story that you're trying to tell rather than just explaining it. And so there's a lot of it along those lines where, kind of what you were saying, like, we can do agreements all day long and add the value, but how much value is that actually adding to the broader company? It worked in that one, the effort was great in that one particular deal, but could you have found a way to make that one deal take less time to focus on just those things that really matter, move it along, and then free up time to actually work on other things? I find it interesting still. I don't know if it's interesting, because I think it's still, I think there are still a lot of legal professionals that find value in how much of a markup can be done in an agreement. And so,
Well said.
You'll receive a contract and you're like, wow, they went through and like put commas, or they didn't like the numberings from ones, and so they changed it to A's and small b's, whatever. And you wonder how much time are you focusing on these things, even like just down to like more somewhat material, but doesn't really change the outcome of the contract. And so
Yes.
I think there is a focus, as we've introduced in the past, of having a risk-based approach to a lot of things that you do. And it really helps, I think, when you can show a risk-based approach. These are what we care about as a company. This is what is going to cause potentially more issues than some of these other things. So let's just focus on this and get those done. And if you can get those buy-in, then you can then show over time, look, here's where we were. It took us X number of days or weeks to get something done. Now we're getting it done in less than a day. And we're still at a area where our risk balanced approach is still within the, within a level set of what the company is comfortable with. You're not going to do something where you're going to give away the farm, but you're going to make sure that everything is balanced against what that particular deal is.
Right on.
Yeah.
Thoughts, Greg?
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on, Cory. Honestly, I think from my perspective, just to add maybe a couple comments, having a clear, concise vision is so pivotal in being able to put something like this into place. And I'll be honest, I didn't really get it, like at certain points in my career, right?
Yeah.
To a large degree, I wrote the coattails of the 2 gentlemen I'm having this call with right now, and sort of adopted a lot of the concepts that we had seen eBay been using, eBay had been using, and adapted those for the needs of the classifieds group. And but being able to, first and foremost, share that vision with the leadership, explain to them in no uncertain terms like what it is you're talking about and how significant difference it can actually make for them. I think once they can kind of conceptualize that, then you can start like rolling it out incrementally, demonstrating the value that it's bringing.
Yeah.
And that just, bolsters the underlying message in the story. And that's where it really kind of like takes off. But I think first and foremost, you've got to be able to have a vision, be able to articulate it and explain it. And, so it's absolutely clear.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'd like to quote a friend of mine, Megan Niedermeyer. She says, "A good legal function facilitates the business and a great legal function accelerates the business." And I think that's just a wonderful way to talk the language of the business, to speak in their language, and give them the vision that this isn't about, lawyers doing more contracty stuff. I mean, I love how you put that, Cory, about like changing the ones to A's and B's. I can totally remember like my early days at eBay, like literally renumbering statements of work to make sure the numbering was right, and like reviewing the buffet contract and all this kind of stuff before I knew we had a policy that you don't do that. Right. I was just like doing everything. What a waste of time. Really. What a waste of my very esoteric education.
Right. And what's the downside? I mean, if something blows up with those contracts, it's always kind of hard for that particular cost center. But if you look at like, what does that mean for the company? So you didn't get your buffet, you got pork chicken, the outcomes are, they kind of are bad for that particular event, but like in the grand scheme of things, it's
you can't negotiate those contracts anyway. I mean, hospitality stuff, they're not going to negotiate the indemnities, right? Like, no way.
Right.
You can't bring your own clown. Sorry. We don't do that anymore after the last clown incident,
Right.
They're not going to know what to do with it if you send it to them, right? No. They're going to be like, what am I supposed to do with these proposed edits? Like,
yes. Our 5 lawyers in New York do not have time to look at your edits.
Yeah. It's one event for thousands.
So I think that there's 2 really good points there, and I'll try and summarize them. One is like vision, purpose, competitive advantage, creating space, creating headspace for the legal function to get the work done, accelerating the business, right? That you can really get the business on board, you can get the legal function on board, because there's some change coming, right? And it's important to have a purpose. It's important to be like, okay, we get this. This is something we actually want to do. This is going to benefit us. This is going to make our roles more sustainable, right? Like, we're not just going to be hammering emails all day long. I didn't go to law school. I didn't work in that damn law firm so that I could spend my life like just responding to emails all day. What a pain in the ass, right? Like, beep. And then on the other side, there's the what Cory's talking about, which is having the sort of hard metrics and data to say, this is gonna benefit the business. And we've done the work. And I think what you're talking about, Cory, is having like a risk matrix agreed with the business that says, at these certain levels of risk, we just don't have the resource, and we never will, to do this work, right? And we agree together, right? CFO to GC or head of commercial or whatever it is. We agree together that these are risks this business is willing to take with our professional, opinion stamp, right? So we're in it together. We're holding hands. We go forward. And I think that actually, and we'll get to the risk-based approach, which I basically learned from you guys. I think that actually is a super important part for the purpose as well, because we've seen, I know you guys have seen this too. You can't just tell lawyers to take more risk, right? They won't do it. We're not trained that way. We're not trained to just go do whatever and, hey, let's I don't need to review this. It's not that important to the overall strategy of the business. We need a policy is what I've found, right? And we need a policy that's agreed by the business, agreed by the GC. Here's the policy. Under this amount, we're not looking at it anymore. It doesn't have this, we're not looking at it anymore. That works. But I think that's super important to mention. So that's really, really great. I love all those points. I wanted to talk next about centralization, intake, process, etc. Greg, you want to give me your thoughts on getting everything down one funnel?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, you really have to be able to do things in a uniform, consistent way for this to work, right? And so that all starts with, like you said, making sure that you're aligned with the business on what the appropriate risks are with respect to certain categories of contracts. And that's that risk matrix you were talking about. Once you sort of get that in place, then it's really just a matter of implementing it. And, that really comes down to, in simple terms, making sure you have the right resources working on the right matters to drive the efficiencies, right? In other words, when you have a non-disclosure agreement come to the legal team for review, it probably doesn't make sense for a most senior legal attorney to be negotiating that NDA when you can have that handled through different other means. You can have a junior attorney or a paralegal work on something like that. So it all starts with sort of that concept in mind, and then you can really kind of extrapolate out from there and look at things like, okay, if my goal is to have only the most strategic stuff end up at the bottom of this funnel where the most senior attorneys working on those things, then what do I do with the rest of it? How do I push the rest of that stuff up to the funnel? And obviously that's a question of how much resource the company has and, whether or not they've got the ability to sort of have, junior attorneys or paralegals work on certain matters. But you can also take advantage of things, technology to push things up to the top of the funnel, like, self-service tools like that in contract lifecycle management programs. And the idea there being, there are things that are such low risk, legal really doesn't even need to look at it, right? We can templatize things, or we can decide based on that risk matrix that there are certain types of agreements, hotel bookings, whatever, that you can push to the top of that funnel. Legal doesn't need to touch it. The business can just get it done. And those are the types of things really that we can start looking at when you're talking about a funnel. What can we get off people's plates? And that's kind of where you start, I think.
Yeah. Cory, centralization, intake?
Yeah. I think the interesting thing that I've found is that, obviously, I don't know if it's obvious, but change can be hard because people are oftentimes set in their ways of how they've done stuff for a long time. So sometimes it's almost more of a psychological approach. Like, yes, that's how we've always done it, but how can we show that there is a more efficient way to do it, so that maybe how you've always done it is really challenging, or it's really just mundane. And so I think that in some regards, it's this approach of how can we show that there is a better way to have this information come in, and then, as Greg said, get to the right resource. And it's there's often times where you may have a process in place and it is working, but it's maybe a little disjointed, and people are kind of complaining about it because they say, I always have to answer this question, even though it never applies to my deal, or I always have to do this or that. And so being able to then work with certain key stakeholders and those who are really involved in the process, and going through and taking a look at how do we do things today, and then document it, and then say, okay, in your perfect world, what would this then look like? And then get some of those hypotheticals of things that they would like to see, and then take that information, compare the two processes, and then also just show, okay, here's what we could do. Here's where we would like to get to, because we agree that those would be, a great and a fantastic approach for everybody, but it might take a few iterations to get there. But then being able to have a process flow where you can show, here's where we are at today. Here's what you told us and what we would like to do. Here's the benefit once we implement that. And then we'll continue to iterate and get to those other things. It's really a evolution. And a lot of times there can be this knee-jerk reaction. Okay, you made changes, but it didn't get everything that I wanted. And so you kind of still hear the murmuring. And so it's constant change management and communication. I think the communication is critical, because you want to try to get responses back before that, maybe that negative feeling or that, kind of disperses. So I think getting that information and then being able to then improve it so that now all of the information that's coming across the company is flowing through one approach in order to get to legal. And then at that point, there's a triage process that Greg was mentioning, like, okay, these are the things that we are going to work on. These are the things that doesn't need a lot of work. And then what I really like is a self-service approach. And I think that is one of the areas where if you can get to the point, it doesn't have to necessarily even always be a tool. There are, native business apps that are being used. Microsoft Office actually has a lot of wealth of information that you can use to try to get, centralized things. But a lot of times, having a system benefits you, but where you can get to a point to where if a contract is submitted and it is on your standard paper or it meets certain criteria and it has the upstream approvals before it gets into legal, then that just goes basically out for signature, because there's nothing else that legal is going to add as long as certain things are met in order to add much value to the contract. So just because it goes to legal, because that's how we feel like every contract needs to go to legal first, doesn't always benefit or doesn't even add an additional value, and can oftentimes slow down getting a deal done. So it's something that we're working on right now, where because we're generating our own templates, and these are going to go straight out to a customer, as long as that gets approved from our revenue team, from our deal desk team, and the clauses are clauses that legal's already approved, then, we want to get to a point to where that just goes straight out for signature. We don't need to have it stop, for a check-in, and it can just go out. So I think the more that you can drive the business to be able to do on their own, and it's already been blessed, and there's not going to be any changes in the legal function, then you actually add a lot of value as part of that funnel approach and that operational approach.
Yep.
Yeah, I'd like to just add an additional comment. David, you asked specifically also about intake and centralization. And I think one of the key components there is that when you don't have an intake process, right? People just go to their favorite attorney or whatever.
Right.
You lose the ability to have oversight and viewability into everything that the company is doing, right? You lose the ability to leverage existing arrangements or agreements to shortcut the process. Rather than starting a contract review anew, you can just do an amendment.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we saw at eBay Classifieds Group that was really neat is, we were really, sort of had a diffused model when I first started there, where we operated in multiple countries around the world, different markets, and all those attorneys were kind of working on separate things, separate matters, maybe not even realizing that they were working sometimes with the exact same supplier.
Yeah.
And so once we got that intake process done and everything started flowing into the exact same channel, we had that viewability. And then we were really able to leverage those existing agreements in a way that was much more meaningful and efficient. And we really saw some growth.
Yeah. And that's one of those things that I think of when I think, like, why is finance allowing legal to still operate in many cases, in many businesses, in that traditional manner, right? And we're talking about, at eBay Classifieds, we had 17 businesses at that time, all around the world, some small, some large, doing all kinds of things, different jurisdictions, different risk profiles. And we had lawyers, some people were regional, some of our businesses were big enough to have their own lawyer, and they were all basically general counseling, right? They were trying to do everything. There were no efficiencies. So it was very challenging, super challenging, very complex environment. And it always strikes me that, one of the goals of the organization, and particularly the finance organization, is to reduce, some significant financial risk to the business. And obviously, if you're doing a deal with Google in South Africa and you got a way better terms than the deal in Canada, there's significant financial risk to the business, right? Like, why aren't we saving millions and millions of dollars on that Canada deal when we've already got great terms in South Africa, or vice versa, right? And that is just endemic, really endemic in commercial legal and across all, multinationals or even just big companies. So it's just one of those things that strikes me. It's the same as, like, we don't have centralized document management in legal. Well, how can you even allow that to happen, right? Like, everybody's got their own documents on their drive and whatever. It's like, but then you have no idea what's really going on. That's a very significant risk issue. So yeah, it just strikes me as one of those things. I think I wanted to, once again, I just wanted to pull some threads together. So I think one of the key drivers of building the engine room is intake, right? I didn't really understand at the time we were doing it at eBay, but it really is super, super valuable to have one place. And it's not, a place, it's a process where everything for a particular workflow, and in this case, we're talking about commercial contracts, but it can also be, marketing review. It can be HR issues, employment issues. It can really be anything, matters or contracts, right? When I say matters, I mean basically anything. When I say contracts, I mean contracts. But having a place to intake, a process to intake that's centralized so that you can then have what Greg's talking about, transparency and visibility, right? And then you can apply some of the things that both of you guys have been talking about, right? All of the efficiencies can then be applied to one place. And I think importantly, maybe even before that, this idea that once you start having visibility, then you can start building metrics for your business case to say, hey guys, did you know that our Italian business is never contacting legal? Did you know that our Australian business is using 35% of the overall resources of the entire legal function? All of those kind of things, right? We really need a process here. And then, I don't know if anybody has previously heard about what Greg calls the funnel approach, right? Both these guys have implemented multiple times what I think of as the funnel. And I can still remember the first time you showed me the graphic, Greg, of basically, everybody knows what a funnel looks like, right? Big on top, small on the bottom. And where in this case, big on top is everything coming into the funnel. Let's take commercial contracts as the example here. And that is dealt with, in our case, we were doing, basically thousands of sales agreements on a monthly basis without touching them, right? That's as low touch as you can get, as high up in the funnel as you can get. Then you're going into things like, and this is what I think of as disaggregation, right? Like as Greg said, and as Cory said, doing the right work with the right resource, right? So don't touch it at all because you've got templates. Touch it a little bit with some automation. Touch it a little bit more because when it went through the automation and the workflow and the intake portal, it had some risk factor that needed review, right? And so you're going from thousands of things to hundreds of things. And then you're going down to, okay, this actually needs, one of our great commercial contract lawyers to look at it. Okay. But at that point, and I think this is really important to say, at that point, 40, 50% of the stuff that was coming into the funnel is already dealt with, right?
Right. That's right.
You haven't had to look at it. It's been automated. So it's off that person's plate. So that person, that commercial lawyer, and the more substantive experts sort of beneath them in the funnel, all the way down to, in our case, it could be different, obviously the levels are different in different companies, but in our case, it was the local generalist lawyer who's sitting there with the leadership team of the business is right down there at the bottom of the funnel, or maybe, our super substantive expert in ad tech, I'm thinking of that kind of thing, right? Down at the bottom of the funnel. Those people now have more time to partner with the business, to be in the room where it happens, to get invited to the offsite, so they can learn about the strategy, so they can partner on what we were talking about before about like, I do have the time to talk to you about this.
Yeah.
Thanks to this engine room, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So 2 points I wanted to call out of that, because I think there's, I think it's somewhat worthwhile. One is on your intake. One of the key things with that is try to keep it as simple as possible. Like sure. You don't want to have a 3-page, 50-question approach to that, because nobody wants to fill that out. You wouldn't want to fill that out if you're the one designing it. So get the basic information that you need so that it doesn't take time from your business, and they can get the information to you enough that you can get going. And then you reach out, as you're working collaborative with them. So I think that's one point I would take away. And then the second one is, there's sometimes a perception that if I free up my time, that's my job security as an attorney. I don't want, if I say, wait, I just reduced 50% of my time, is the company going to say, well, wait a minute, why am I paying you full time if now you've freed up 50% of your time? So the important talk track there is that you didn't free up your time for the substantive from, just your general legal work, is that you got rid of work that you shouldn't be paying an attorney to do anyway, so that now they can actually be more, like he said, in the room where it happened. It's a great Hamilton quote. It's a great legal quote. So, it's helpful to show that it's not just, hey, look, legal now is doing 50% less. Well, wait a minute. Then why do we have a legal team if they're doing less? It is, and now we are doing this because of it. And so where we were down here at ground level, now we've raised it and we're actually adding more value for you, CEO of the company, for you, VP of whichever business you're supporting. I am there now for you so that I can be, at your offsites. I can be in your team meetings. I'm part of that team so that we are working together upstream to avoid these things downstream that actually have more impact to the company. So I think those are, some of the takeaways from this part of that centralization, this disaggregation of work.
Yeah, and let me give you a real life example of how that played out at eBay Classifieds Group, because once we got this file or this funnel really kind of dialed in, and we saw that we actually had some more bandwidth to take on more things. Well, the challenge to me was, well, what's next?
Yeah.
Right. And so I thought, well, look, we're outsourcing some of the work that we do to different departments like privacy to negotiate data protection agreements. Those are agreements, they're contracts. We're negotiating contracts. Why don't we just become experts on data privacy law so that we can negotiate those contracts ourselves? And so as a consequence, my team all got certified in CIPPE and started negotiating. We partnered with privacy. They worked with us to help us understand all the nuances of how we wanted those contract provisions negotiated specifically for eBay. And we took that on and we simplified that process and streamlined that process, which just made value of what we were able to do that much more apparent.
Yeah.
So, those are the types of real life examples I'm sure we could all pick out that allow you to really, again, move the needle even further.
Right.
Accelerate the business. Yeah, no, totally. It's a great example, Greg. I remember when that happened. The other example I often give when I'm talking to people about this stuff is the point at which we reached, like I was saying earlier, sort of 40% reduction in workload, in commercial contract workload, right? If you think of a pie chart, right, and you think of what a generalist lawyer does, it's not 100% of their day commercial contracts, right? It might be 20, it might be 40, whatever, it depends on the business. Obviously, the commercial contract lawyers, it's a lot higher percentage of the work they do, which is the right thing to do, right? They're experts. They can get it done faster. They can dive deeper. But I remember the point where I was looking at this chart you were showing me, where we did get to 40% of the work, basically being done through expedited processes. And I can remember you telling me, or somebody telling me, okay, this process is working so well somewhere on the planet. This process is working so well. We're so excited about how this, engine room is driving our function. We've got some extra resources, like literally money. We've got some extra money in our budget. We would like to give it to you. We would like you to have some of this budget to do more of this stuff. And that's for me when it was like, okay, like this is a stage of change management that I have not encountered before, right? Like normally it's just like, as Cory's saying, like, what about my job? It's, and sort of trying to focus everybody on the purpose here is not to be document monkeys, basically, right? Like our job is not just pushing paper. Our job is to be a strategic advantage to this business and see over the horizon and avoid icebergs and all that cool stuff. But we moved far enough down that change management cycle that we were literally being told, this is so great for my function and my workload and my life and my ability to partner with the business and maybe take a holiday every once in a while, that have some of this money. So I thought that was a great,
yeah, that's a great example.
Sort of stamp of approval, right?
Mm-hmm.
From lawyers actually in country doing the work. Next point for me, technology, implementation, change management, etc. We've touched on a bunch of this stuff already, but I think it's just worth, you can do it, as you're saying, Cory. It's entirely possible to start the engine up using the tools you have today. You could do it with paper, right? I've actually, I don't know if you guys have worked in this situation. I've actually talked to people who are like, I can remember when, we had the pink sheet, and the pink sheet went around the office to the in tray with the, notations on it and all that kind of stuff. So it's totally possible to do. Obviously, it's way less efficient, and it's not shared and all that kind of stuff. You could have a centralized, email intake for contracts, right? It can come in one place. You can have a form. I think we did that for a while, right? Like we had to have like a Word document attached to the contract, et cetera, that sort of contract intake form. But now, of course, there are actually what I think of as fit for purpose tools, right? Yeah. We finally got to the point in the technology cycle, and we're almost catching up to our friends in finance and sales and marketing who have fit for purpose tools built for their function, right? That take into account what we actually do, as opposed to what whoever who made sort of the legacy stuff, often in the finance field, thought lawyers did, right? As a sort of offshoot of something else. Now we have something that actually fit for purpose. So I'm interested here. I know you guys have all implemented different technologies at different businesses at multiple times. So I'm interested to hear your learnings from like what you're looking for, implementation cycles, et cetera. Learnings for the audience.
I think there's a few things. Technology is really beneficial, and there are a lot of ways to look at it. You can look at, okay, here is the best in class for this particular thing, or here is something that can do a broad range of different things pretty well. So I think you have to look at, if you already have a tech stack, what is it that you're currently using and what are you trying to solve for? And then if you don't, you almost go through the same analysis. It's like, okay, we don't have anything today. What are the 1, 2, 3 main things that we want to do right away? And then what can we then do down the road? And then try to find the way to get that done. The good and the bad is technology is great. The challenge can often be, if you're in a mature company already that has different systems that are working together or that are working for those particular departments, is will this implementation actually talk to others? Because there's a benefit of getting your tool in for you. There is a better benefit for the company to get in a tool that can maybe leverage what's already out there and then funnel a lot of data together so that you are then able to drive people to have to fill out, okay, I got to go to this system and fill out this. I got to go to this system and fill out that. And then I got to go to this system and fill out this third thing. And then behind the scenes, those 3 teams from those systems have to talk. And then somehow that data has to get back into those systems so they're consistent. So there's a bit of a analysis that has to happen. And oftentimes, you're bringing in your IT teams or your experts that can kind of help you map what is it that we can do and is it even possible? So I think technology from that approach is really important. But what really is the value add is when you can see that things are disjointed and that there is a way to actually make it work so that it is more streamlined and you are having people do less work, but getting more information out of it because now your systems are sharing. That's where there's a lot of value. And it also reduces the effort on your business people. If they have to fill out 3 different forms every time they do something, it's just mind numbing. And oftentimes the questions are duplicative across each one of those systems.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what Greg was talking about, right? With the privacy review. We actually had, I can remember it, but there was a separate system for that, right? And there was all this talk about maybe one day we'll integrate the 2 systems, et cetera, et cetera. And, I'm sure it's different now, but it really speaks to this. And I think this is what you're talking about, Cory, taking like a process-based approach, like a project management-based approach, instead of just being like, okay, we need a CLM or whatever, let's just buy it and launch it and hope for the best. And everybody has to use it. It's more taking a step back. What's the purpose? Why are we doing this in the first place? Let's get ahead of the change management curve And then let's look at tools that are, let's look at processes internally and see, where the friction is, right?
Yeah.
Do
And it's
we have
easy to
visibility?
now. Yeah, it takes a lot of effort. Sometimes it takes more effort on that upfront socialization and discussion and
Totally.
get buy-in than the actual effort of doing the work.
You're making me think of painting, right? When you paint a house or paint a room, right? The real effort is actually in the prep and the taping, right?
Mhm.
Painting, getting that big old sprayer out and spraying the room takes half an hour, but you might have spent 2 days doing the prep work, maybe longer if it's a good painter who doesn't mess the whole thing up. But Greg, thoughts about, I think the rollout of technology, the idea of like, how do you do your assessment? How do you convince the business, finance, legal that this sort of thing is of value?
Yeah, well, I'll start by saying, in my experience, I found that the right technology, to Cory's point, is pivotal and transformative entirely for how much better things can be within an organization if you have that, as opposed to the absence of it. And, it's a little bit difficult to sometimes convince people without the ability to be able to rely on past experiences. And I think that's a big part of it. When you can definitively demonstrate and state like the ways in which it made a difference, it's so much easier for understand why it's helpful. Not just in terms of having a centralized repository where everything's in one place so that when questions arise, you know where to go and get the answers. But that you have a system and a tool and process where things are properly approved so that things aren't getting signed, outside of a process that nobody knows about. Finance isn't even aware of a contract. But just having a uniform way to absolve risk, make sure things are done consistently and correctly, and, in a logical, meaningful manner. There's so many things to it that it brings to the table that you just don't have without it.
Yeah. And I think we're probably at a stage of the evolution of how legal function is built and led, that we're still having to have this discussion almost. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
you would never. I always think of the new head of HR, the CHRO comes in and says, well, we're going to need Workday. You guys don't have a system for that. And the head of finance doesn't go, nah, well, just use email. Why does HR need a system, right? The same with, like, if your head of sales comes in, your new head of sales comes in and goes, okay, we're going to knock this out of the park. We're going to have this amazing sales function. We're going to make tons of money. First, we're going to need Salesforce. No, you don't. Why would sales need a system, right? Like, can't you guys just use email? We've already got Microsoft. For some reason, when lawyers ask for something that is vastly cheaper than either of those two previously discussed products, the response is, why would you need a system? Lawyers don't use technology. Can't you just use email? And it's like, how are you guys not seeing the value of all of this stuff, right? Because there's so many enormous value drivers to some kind of engine room for your business, whatever the business is. Maybe just a couple points from me on, like, we've all got the battle scars of having to implement and utilize like legacy technology, right? Like the good old days, which is still around. Like, there are plenty of businesses still buying sort of SAP based, tools, right? Like that kind of level of interface. And I think it's important to be clear that is the past, right? Like, the technology that is now available to in-house legal functions is intuitive, easy to use, drag and drop, the kind of interface that you would expect from a consumer product. And so, it is much easier to implement, is much easier to update and amend, is being constantly amended. It's a SaaS platform, right? So it should be updated regularly, almost daily in some cases, to get better and better. Is of course hosted in the cloud. And I think for me, the one thing I always talk about when I'm talking to potential customers at LawView is the fact that it has a progressive implementation as opposed to sort of a hard cutoff type thing, which we've all experienced, right? This idea that on Tuesday, we're all going to start submitting everything through this system, on Ariba or something, and off you go. And everybody goes, oh God, no, please don't try and make me do that. And the benefit of a modern system is that it's very much you can crawl, walk, run.
Yeah.
Right. You can start with a rollout internally to just the 5 champions in your legal function. I think that's worth talking about too, right? This sort of progressive approach. 5 people in the legal function who are in Australia who really love technology. And they can then evangelize to the British team and the US team. And then you've got the legal function stood up, right? And they're excited about it. And then you can turn the portal on and you can roll it out to the business. And maybe you just roll it out to the Australian business because those guys are goo for tech, right? And et cetera, right? Yeah. And then maybe you roll out matters as well as contracts or vice versa, right? And maybe you roll out billing and maybe you roll out other things and different workloads, et cetera. So it's not this like in 6 weeks, it's all over kind of approach, which we used to have to do, right? Which was super, super painful. Maybe we get to the last point I have here, which is data and reporting. I think, metrics, data, benchmarking is unfortunately one of my favorite subjects. Just the way I am. So how do you guys think about taking information from the engine room and using it to drive the function in the business?
Well, maybe I'll start out on that one. I remember early days when I was at eBay, we really just didn't have the ability to see that kind of information. And that was one of the questions that was posed to me. How do we get it? And it started out with spreadsheets and building graphs and doing things like that, which was very manual. And as we got more sophisticated tools, CLM tools and things of that nature, out of the box reporting was already 10 times better than that. And it really gave you the ability to see, where you need to put your emphasis, where you need to put your focus, and be able to see the benefits of everything that you're putting together. Right. And that's something you can then just take to your business and demonstrate in clear, unambiguous certainty how this is actually making a difference for them. And everybody. And so that to me was really pivotal.
Yeah. And I think it goes to, as you were saying before, it goes to being the business. Data is king. If you're working with your sales team, they use data in order to show, the value add of the product that you're selling. If you're doing anything within the company, particularly your all hands, like all of these different meetings, they're using data to show how the company is doing, or how's our product doing, or how are our sales, how's the retention. So it's really no different for a legal function. It's okay, here's the data. I'm not just telling you we're busy. I'm not just telling you that we're getting a lot of things done. I'm not just telling you that, we had a higher quarter. I can show you, look, Q2 was significantly higher than Q1. That's why we couldn't get everything done, or that's why we kept saying we needed to be able to push this off for now so that we can focus on these things. It's really that showing that data can do to support what it is that you're actually trying to give back to the business. I think that's important. We, it's an area that we're working on a lot right now. And there's easy ways to get reporting. Some tools are much better at it than others. And so you may be able to get out of the box. You may be able to get information that, all the data is in your, if you're using the CLM, all your data is in there, but sometimes the built-in tools don't give you what you need. And so you have to then find other ways to get it. And so take that time though. It's definitely well worth it. A way, just a little bit, just one example on this is, we're using now a different intake for just legal help, legal requests, legal issues, legal urgent, I need your help. And they're not just necessarily contract related. They're just anything within the business that, we just kind of need legal guidance on this. And prior to just a few months ago, we had just an email inbox. So it would come in, we would take that information, someone would put it in a spreadsheet, we would meet on it, see who's going to take it, discuss it, and then, try to close it out. But it was really hard it was a manual effort. Someone had to monitor that inbox on email all the time and then move it over into a spreadsheet. So what we did is we've moved it now into a tool that we're using. And just this past, 2 weeks ago, we now have all of this rich data on how many teams are pinging us, what time of the week are we getting most hits, who is it within the team that's solving these things, what are the issues, what are we seeing repeated issues over and over again. You can't get that if you don't get the data. You can't then tell the story about, okay, yes, we're busy on contract, but we're also busy because we have 100 different requests to us to answer these business related questions. It's not contract related, but it takes time. We have to research. We might have to go to outside counsel. We might have to take extra time. So it's valuable in all facets of where you're at within the legal function.
Yeah. No, I love that last story there, Cory, because I've heard that before. I've actually heard legal leaders tell me when I turned on, a matter management system, which is what you're basically talking about, right? Like matter intake as opposed to contract intake.
Right.
The business could not believe how much stuff we were doing, right?
Yeah.
Because
right.
there's always been this huge gap for in-house teams in understanding, like, where is all this work coming from, right? The visibility, the transparency, and the ability to make that into a cool chart that you can show to your business leaders in a meeting just hasn't existed before. And now with matter management and contract management, especially if you have them together, right? And the visualization of them allows you to really show, like, this is a good chunk of what we're doing, right? The admin part, you might even be able to get in there too, because the system should be able to say, what are people doing on the system, right? I actually love that. I love that view of the data as well. I think that there's enormous value to having the data and the metrics and speaking the language of the business, right? Which is what you guys are talking about. I mean, I could talk about this forever. This is such an awesome conversation. I really, really appreciate you guys speaking to me about this. I think, change management alone, we could do a whole episode on, because I think it's such a fascinating process. It's just been great seeing you guys. I really appreciate the time. Obviously see you both soon. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, David. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it's been really great. It's a great topic and love talking about it. So I really appreciate it.
And thank you everybody for joining us. This has been the Legal Leaders Podcast, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thanks very much.
If you enjoyed listening, please hit follow and leave us a review on your listening platform of choice. We love engaging with our community and hearing from you, so please head to inview.lawview.com. Thank you so much for tuning in.